So we will start the third panel of today's working session, which is Navigating the Future, Prospects and Challenges for Stellarized Ministry in the Philippines. And we have Maruja Milagros Villones Assis, who is the director of the Scalabrini Immigration Center in Manila. She is on Zoom. I think she is connected. You are most welcome. Maruja is a psychologist with more than 30 years of research experience in international migration and social transformation in Asia. She is currently working on a study on the reintegration experiences for Filipino migrant workers who were repatriated during COVID-19 pandemic. She is also the editor of the Asian and Pacific Migration Journal, and she directed the study on the Stellarized ministry in the Philippines, which produced a book and a video report that was presented last summer. So we have Maruja Milagros with us, and you are most welcome to address the conference. So we cannot see your video. Are you there? She was, yeah. It is mute. So maybe you have to tell her that she's Hello, now we can see you. Maruja, welcome. I have introduced your presentation and the floor is yours.
No, say it again now. We were muted.
Hello, Maruja. Start video. Hello? Oh, hello. Now we can hear you. So I am moderating your session this afternoon, and I have just introduced yourself and your presentation on navigating the future, prospects and challenges for Stellarized ministry in the Philippines. So the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon to everyone. I will just try to upload and share the PowerPoint screen now, on the screen. So once again, good afternoon. And allow me to begin by first thanking the organizers for inviting me to be part of the 25th Stellarized World Congress. It is unfortunate that due to the delay in getting my UK visa, I am unable to join in person. Thankfully, we have Zoom to the rescue and we can manage to be together, although we are apart. So, when we consider that the Stellarized ministry was established way back in 1920, we can say that the ministry has acquired a history of faithful service and ministry to seafarers, and this very long experience is rich ground for lessons and insights for moving forward into the future. It is within the larger and broader history, ministry, and future of Stellarized globally that I would like to situate the Stellarized ministry in the Philippines. So in this presentation, I will try to cover the following topics. I will try to discuss the origins and the development of the Stellarized ministry in the Philippines. Then I will also go into some discussion about new trends and institutional developments that may have implications for the sea-based sector in the country and the ministry. And lastly, based on the findings from the study, I will try to offer some points for reflection on possible directions in navigating the post-pandemic landscape and culture. This presentation is based on research findings that the Stellarized Migration Center conducted in the Philippines and in part in Taiwan in 2020-2021. The research tried to document the history and development of Stella Maris Ministry in the Philippines and also to examine the relevance of the ministry to seafarers, fishers, and their families. The research used a mixed methods approach to gather data, which involved the review of documents, interviews with key informants, a survey of Filipino-based, sea-based workers, which numbered 493, interviews with 25 fishers in Taiwan, and in-depth interviews with 10 families of seafarers. We thank the Stella Maris UK for funding support and the cooperation of the Stella Maris Network in the Philippines in the implementation and completion of the project. The book and the video report are the knowledge products that came from this project. So on to the highlights. The year 2020 marks the 64th year of the establishment of the first Stella Maris Center that was established in the port of Manila. At that time, in 1958, the Philippines was not yet a major player in the global maritime industry. It would take up several decades, sometime in 1975, when the Philippine state started to get invested in the sending of its nationals abroad. Unlike other countries of origin in the region, the Philippines sends both land-based and sea-based workers, and it has risen to become the crewing capital in the world. It should also be mentioned that the Stella Maris Ministry did not start to gain a lot of visibility not until the 1980s. The nucleus of the Stella Maris Ministry in the Philippines is that of the Stella Maris Center that was established in Manila. The signing of an agreement between the Archdiocese of Manila and the Scalabrinian Fathers in 1984 entrusted Stella Maris to the latter. The agreement would prove to be providential as the Scalabrinian Fathers provided the much-needed focus and direction to the ministry. Given their charism to provide care to migrants, the Scalabrinian Fathers who took the helm of Stella Maris Manila dedicated their energies to promoting the protection, welfare, and integral development of seafarers and their families. Since 1989, other Stella Maris centers were also established beyond Manila. Much of the development of the Stella Maris Ministry, particularly the establishment of centers in different parts of the country, can be attributed to the untiring efforts of three key missionaries. Father Savino Bernardi, who for a time, actually for many years, was the chaplain and director of Stella Maris in Manila. Father Jack Walsh, a Marinol missionary who established the center in Davao in 1989, and Father Roland Doriol, a Jesuit, who established the center in Cebu in 1991. This was also the beginning, since the Stella Maris Center was not only confined to Manila, and there were already other centers in Davao and Cebu. This was also the beginning of the establishment of the National Office of the Ministry. We can say that the 1990s was probably a glorious decade as far as the expansion of the ministry is concerned. During this time, there were several publications that were circulated. One of them is the Ahoy magazine, which had a run between 1996 and 2004. And a very important source of reference for Filipino seafarers was the publication of the Ahoy Manual for Seafarers, which had 3 editions in 1996, 1998, and 2004. The handbook at the time really served its purpose because it provided a lot of information on the legal recruitment of seafarers, the rights of seafarers and the responsibilities of different duty bearers. And it also includes, among others, a directory of the different Stella Maris centers that were established in the Philippines. And it also includes, among others, a directory of the different Stella Maris centers that were established in the Philippines. The handbook were present in the different ports that seafarers might also visit at some point during their sojourn. Another event of note in the 1990s was the holding of the 20th AOS World Congress in Davao City in 1997. And also another important event that took place in the 1990s is the proclamation of the National Seafarers Sunday, wherein the Stellarized ministry was very much instrumental in having this proclamation passed. So since 1996, on the last Sunday of September, this is known as the National Seafarers Sunday, and it is an occasion to honor the seafarers who have contributed much to Philippine society and also globally because of their work. And it is also a special occasion on the part of the local Catholic Church to offer special prayers for the intentions of seafarers and their families. At the moment, there are now 11 centers that are located in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So we can say that all the three major island groupings have centers that are established in key provinces and seaports. And as I had mentioned earlier, since the early 1990s, there's already the National Directorate Office. The establishment of the centers follows the principles that are stated in the motto proprio of the Stellarized Apostolate, and that is that it usually begins with the assignment of a parish priest, as the chaplain and director of the center. To date, two of the centers are actually led by lay people, and we also have to acknowledge that religious sisters provide important support to the ministry. In thinking about the programs and services that were developed in the Philippines, we have to consider that these are shaped by the Philippines as a major source country of migrants for the global labor market. So it's not only in the sea-based sector that the Philippines has gained some dominance in capturing a sizable part of the global labor market, but also in the so-called land-based sector. So in the Philippines, the ministry has to navigate a landscape that includes many players and participants when it comes to discussions concerning migration. This would involve national government agencies. This would include the recruitment industry, which I think would number around 300 the last time, but perhaps because of the pandemic, the numbers might have gone down. There are also the maritime schools that the ministry also has to deal with, and various civil society organizations that are oriented to the protection of the rights of migrant workers, including seafarers. And of course, there's the local church, as you can see. In the case of Stellarized Manila, the Archdiocese of Manila has been very instrumental in its establishment and also in supporting various programs and services of the Stellarized Manila up until now. And of course, not to forget the important and key actors and key stakeholders when it comes to discussions about the sea-based sector and migration are the migrants and their families. So in a sense, when we look at the programs and services of the Stellarized ministry in the Philippines, they're very similar to the programs and services that are present in other Stellarized centers in different parts of the world. The heart of the ministry really is to accompany seafarers and their families and to let them know that they are not alone, especially in their struggles. So in a sense, the Stellarized Philippines also offers the same programs and services that have been identified as part of the Stellarized ministry. So this would involve welcoming seafarers, visiting them on trips, distributing prayers and other spiritual readings, celebrating the Eucharist, hospital visitation, and the like. But as a major source country of migrants, several programs and services also developed in the Philippines to take into account the fact that this is largely a country of out-migration. Okay. So it would be of obvious now, by now that international migration is of course a huge phenomenon in the Philippines. And in the case of the sea-based sectors comprise 20% of overseas Filipinos who are deployed every year. But of course, globally, Filipinos are said to account for 25% of the world's international seafarers. What is also very important to acknowledge at this point is that non-traditional seafarers are also becoming an important component of the sea-based sector in the Philippines. And when it comes to non-traditional seafarers, their participation in the industry has been ushered in by the development of by developments in the cruise ship industry. And the non-traditional sector includes the participation of women. As a whole, however, when we consider the sea-based sector in the Philippines in its entirety, it's still predominantly male, but there's already the participation of women because of their employment in various capacities in the cruise line industry. And very recently, there has been a renewed focus on fishers, also as an important subsector of the sea-based sector. I would also just like to point out a historical footnote. I say here renewed focus on fishers because actually way back in the 1990s, the Ahoy magazine that I introduced to you a while ago, it already covered issues concerning the plight of fishers on international fishing vessels. And in fact, one of the contributors of the early articles about the plight of fishers is Father Bruno. And way back in the 1990s, he already coined the term, he already referred to fishers as the forgotten seafarers. So this is a list of the various programs and services that are available and are made available by the Stellarized ministry in the Philippines. I'd like to point out that the first two programs that are mentioned here concerning spiritual formation and accompaniment of sea-based workers and their families, as well as the awareness-raising campaigns that accompany the celebration of the National Seafarers Sunday. These are the activities that are common across all the centers. The rest of the activities and programs are not offered by all centers. So it depends also on the level of institutional development as well as the resources of the centers. So for example, when it comes to dormitory facilities, these are offered only by Stellarized in Manila, which operates 2 centers, and the Stellarized in Cebu, which operates 1 center. But as you can see from this list, the fact that the Philippines is an out-migration country can be gauged on the kinds of programs that have been developed by the ministry here. And that would include the preparation of seafarers with pre-departure orientation seminars, values formation for maritime students. I mentioned earlier that maritime schools are one of the important stakeholders in the sea-based sector. And an important aspect of the work of the Stellarized ministry in the Philippines is the advocacy for promotion and protection of the rights of sea-based workers and members of their families. I have to mention that in the Philippines, civil society organizations are quite active in the field of migration, but also there's some kind of unevenness because there are a lot more civil society organizations that are working for the promotion of the protection of land-based workers. So the Stellarized ministry is one of the few voices that have consistently pushed for the promotion and protection of the rights of sea-based workers. It's also good to mention that during the pandemic, we can say that the Stellarized ministry in the Philippines rose to the occasion. A lot of the services, of course, were suspended because the Philippines had one of the hardest and longest lockdowns. So what this meant in terms of service organizations like Stellarized and other NGOs in the country is that they had to suspend their in-person services and they had to shift to online services. Whatever services can be provided online, such as counseling, masses and prayers, information and education services. it was quite fast the way that Stella Maris centers in the Philippines and other NGOs in the Philippines have adjusted to this situation. It should also be mentioned that the centers of the dormitories in Manila and Cebu continue to provide lodging and meals to stranded seafarers, and various centers in the Philippines also participated in the distribution of financial assistance that were provided to affected seafarers and fishers and their families. It's also important to mention here, again, as part of the advocacy activities of the ministry in the Philippines, that various Stella Maris centers joined the global campaign to consider seafarers as essential workers. And they were also among the actors and organizations that advocated with the Philippine government to prioritize seafarers for the vaccination programs. The study also had the perspectives, tried to get the perspectives of the seafarers and their families, because this is the target audience of the ministry. And this is just a summary of what we can take of what the data has suggested from the survey, the interviews, and also the life stories of migrants and their families. The good news is that Stella Maris is quite well known to the respondents. And also quite a number, actually a high percentage of the respondents, out of we had a total of 493 survey respondents, 77% said that they had had encounters with Stella Maris centers overseas. A slightly higher proportion of the respondents said that they had encounters with various Stella Maris centers within the Philippines. It's also good to mention that one of the findings key findings from the survey is that respondents considered it very important to have spiritual support. And I mention this because, of course, this is one of the long-running services and programs that Stella Maris centers have offered from the time of its beginnings. And what this suggests to us is that spiritual support is something that is considered important by the seafarers themselves. And when it comes to suggestions for programs that might benefit the families left behind, the respondents suggested that there might be a need to offer financial literacy programs for left behind families, and also maybe to have some programs that are focused on the children of the sea-based workers. So this is something that can be considered also as part of future programming. And from the fisher study in Taiwan, despite the fact that most of the fishers who are hired to work on Taiwanese fishing vessels, despite the fact that they go through the legal channels, they still continue to experience a lot of vulnerabilities and risks at work. And so the study therefore confirmed the need to offer support and to develop programs and services that would be appropriate to respond to concerns and needs of fishers and their families. In terms of navigating the future, what are some of the takeaways that we can get from the study? One is that Stella Maris has really become an important source of support to sea-based workers and their families. And in the Philippines, because of Stella Maris' consistent and determined involvement in issues, various issues concerning the sea-based sector, Stella Maris is identified as a key actor in the advocacy for the promotion and empowerment of sea-based workers and their families. And Stella Maris has also been acknowledged and identified as an important source of point of reference on issues concerning sea-based workers and maritime issues in general. And various stakeholders in the Philippines also recognize that one of the strengths of Stella Maris as a ministry is that the Stella Maris here in the Philippines, the various centers here are also connected not just to a national network, but also to a global network. In thinking about the future and considering the broader context and broader environment, We have to acknowledge that up until now, the pandemic is not yet completely over, and there are many unknowns in the post-pandemic landscape. So over the short term, pandemic-related concerns will continue to be part of our reflection on how we can do things better as we move towards a post-pandemic landscape. Perhaps one of the questions that we can ask ourselves is that during the pandemic, seafarers have been identified and acknowledged as essential workers. And so this is a point that we can use to better promote, in our advocacy, to better promote the protection of the rights of seafarers, fishers, and their families. Because the one question that we probably need to answer is that if seafarers are indeed essential workers, are they necessarily better protected now? And will they be necessarily better protected also in the future? In the Philippines, at least, the data show, particularly when we consider the deployment data, that is the trends and patterns when it comes to Filipino workers leaving the country. We can see from the deployment data of in the Philippines that indeed between land-based workers and sea-based workers, there seems to be a greater demand for seafarers. And this is borne by the deployment data. And again, we can connect this with the fact that a lot of it may be connected with the acknowledgement of seafarers as performing very essential work. But also in our discussions with seafarers and also with their family members, health concerns also continue to be a source of anxiety for seafarers and their families, because even if they do get a chance to remigrate and to work again, there's always the fear that about their health, about what could happen to them when they are at sea. I'd also like to mention here that from an ongoing study that we are about to complete now, indeed compared with land-based workers, our data also show that of those who have returned to the Philippines since the pandemic, it seems that there are more sea-based workers, particularly seafarers in the traditional sector, that have remigrated since their return in 2020 compared to the land-based worker. One source also of anxiety and maybe a question mark for the sea-based sector in the Philippines is the new institutional arrangement that came about in February of this year. It used to be that in the Philippines, the governance of migration rested on different, it's a multi-agency responsibility, but with the passage of a new law, the new law established a single agency, which is called the Department of Migrant Workers. And this was, this started to become operational in February of this year. So there are still many questions as to how this Department of Migrant Workers will perform compared to the older setup of institutional arrangements in the Philippines. So a key question, therefore, and a source also of uncertainties, is how persistent issues be addressed under the new department. As I mentioned earlier, we also, in terms of trends and developments, we need to address workers in the cruise industry as well. And because of the participation of women in the sea-based sector, there might be a need to adopt also gender-responsive lens and approaches so that the needs and concerns as well as the challenges and opportunities that face women in the sea-based sector can also be attended to. We also reiterate here the need to address fishers and their families. And then one aspect that was highlighted during from our experience during the pandemic is the issue of return. What is life like after seafaring? In the life stories that are featured in the book, it seems that this is also a question that families also grapple with, because when it comes to seafarers, there is of course a certain age that they have to retire, and their prospects of continuing economic activities in the Philippines may be limited. So in fact, some of the examples that we know of seafarers who have returned for good, it seems that for them, post-seafaring life would consist of, maybe being part of a recruitment agency, or of a crewing agency, or serving as resource persons in various training programs. Okay. In looking at the future, we also have to pay attention in enhancing the capacity of Stellarized as an organization. So today, even if there's already a national network of various centers in the Philippines, and there is of course some cooperation that takes place among the different centers, it is very important, and one of the key recommendations of the study is that it is very important to strengthen the national office so that it could provide better direction and better coordination to the member Stellarized centers within the national network, and to link them also with the global Stellarized. Okay. We have various recommendations, but a few things that I'd like to highlight, and one of them is the leadership of the different centers. So I think I may have mentioned already earlier that the modus usually follows what is prescribed in the motu proprio, and that is the bishop would assign a priest to head a center and also as chaplain of the center as well. But what we found from the study is that this may not necessarily be the best approach in all circumstances, because there are different levels of commitment on the part of the priests who are assigned as chaplains and directors. They also may demonstrate different levels of interest in the ministry. They may also have different levels of competencies, and so this is where the question of providing formal program of training and orientation to chaplains and directors would come in. And considering the involvement of volunteers, considering the involvement of sisters, religious sisters, as well as the core of women volunteers that are part of the various Stellarized centers, it might also be good to consider of expanding the leadership of the centers and opening it to the sisters and lay persons as well. Well, one thing that is common across all the centers in the Philippines, even if there are some centers that are better resourced than others, is that generally speaking, there is severe resource constraints in terms of staffing and human resources, in terms of technology, and in terms of money. So volunteers continue to be a great resource in the implementation of the various programs and services in the Philippines, but it is time perhaps to also think of hiring a dedicated staff to manage and oversee the programs. It is also good to consider a continuing formation program for staff and volunteers. In the case of volunteers, the consultations that we've had with volunteers, as well as the interviews that, as well as the insights that came from the interviews, is that they really value their participation in the ministry, and in fact, they don't put a money price to their involvement and their work in carrying out the ministry. And so it would be good to provide incentives to keep the volunteer spirit alive, as well as also to provide continuing staff training and orientation, so that they can also better understand the work that they're doing and also relate it within the larger context of what the church is doing for migrants and seafarers. The lesson from the pandemic is that technology is very helpful, and so it would also be good to think of investing in technology as well, and also to accompany this with capacity building of the staff as well. What we have noticed is that in terms of the funding situation in many of the centers, except for a very, very few, all the centers really have a very tight budget. And all the centers tend to rely on traditional sources of funds, and that means, among others, like whatever allowance or whatever funding will be provided by the bishop. So perhaps also as part of strengthening Stella Maris as an organization, it's also good to consider exploring various funding sources as well, so that additional resources could better fund target programs and could also have a lot more impact. I think I would just like to end by saying that despite the fact that all these years, the various centers had to cope with resource constraints, and yet, despite this serious limitation, they managed to rise to the occasion and to provide needed services and support to seafarers, fishers, and their families. And I think with that, I'd like to thank you for your kind attention, and I hope that there will be some discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Maruja. I hope that you can stay connected with us, because I think that you have raised a number of very interesting aspects resulting from the study that you conducted. And I hope that most of you have identified some of these situations in your own national Stella Maris organizations, and that recommendations from this study can also be of help to you when trying to improve and to develop your national Stella Maris activities. One of the navigating the future aspects that Maruja has mentioned has been the importance of the global network. And I cannot agree more with her and with this outcome, that one of our strengths is the global network that we are. And this is coincident with the strategy, the international strategy that we have launched here in the UK some 3 years ago. It was a 5-year strategy to invest in promoting or helping Stella Maris internationally. We have created a dedicated committee for that, and as most of you will be aware, we have been in contact with different national Stella Maris organizations, trying to provide or to share our experiences here in the UK. This is, of course, connected with resources, which is an issue that has been clearly identified. And again, if our experience here and experience from that study can be of help, I think that there is a lot to share for you also to consider at your national level. We are privileged to have a director of development with us here in Stella Maris UK, Adrian, who is around there. So I'm sure that he will also be available to participate in discussing how investing in funding and resources can generate additional resources through corporate and other ways of innovative funding that we all need. With that, which is my own reflection from that presentation, I open the floor to you. Ricardo. Wait, because if not, she will not be. Thank you.
Perhaps I'll stop sharing so maybe I can see what's going on in front.
Well, Ricardo from Barcelona, Spain. You have spoken about leadership in the future and the possibility that this leadership will be held by religious sisters or lay people. I don't know in the Philippines, when I think about Europe, sisters are not more than priests. So I think the future for Stella Maris should be leadership by the lay people. But again, this is another problem, because this can be paid by the church. The deacon, it's a good question, and religious support the community. But a lay person, if he or her or she should dedicate all the necessary time, then they have to get a salary. And this is again then a second problem. But I think should be the objective. The future is that the Stellarized can pay for somebody in charge, and this somebody in the future should be a lay person. Of course, it can be some support from a clergy, from religious, but I think lay people is the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. I don't know if you have any views, Maruja, or anyone else in the room.
I'm sorry, I have to ask for your assistance if there was a specific question that was addressed to me. I find it a bit difficult to follow the discussion of your end. Was there a specific question?
Well, not just a specific question, it was a comment or maybe your views about the possibility that in future Stellarized centers are run by lay person and how this staff or individuals should be paid. This is something that you have raised in your presentation.
Yeah. If I may provide, if I may elaborate a little bit about that. Perhaps the hiring of lay persons can also be helpful because they provide the continuity in the institution. We know that, for example, chaplains and directors, they have a timeline. They may be changed every 3 years or 5 years, depending on the cycle of assignments of the various local churches. And so having a dedicated staff that would handle the management and the day-to-day affairs also of the center could really be very helpful. Again, I'd like to also mention a little bit more and maybe go back to some possibilities for resource sharing within the national network and also between networks in the global Stellarized. I remember that, for instance, in the case of the Philippines, several centers have expressed, several key informants from several centers have expressed that they do not have an experience in dealing with fishers and their families. But one of the centers, one of the Stellarized centers in the Philippines, the one that is based in General Santos, has actually a long experience in developing programs and support services to fishers and their families. So this is one example where there could be resources are not only in terms of money, but also in terms of sharing experiences and information and practices. And so this is one way where maybe the Stellarized Center in General Santos, which has a long experience in working with fishers, they may be able to share their experiences, what worked for them, the good practices, as well as some of the endeavors where they did not do as well. And these are some kinds of information that they can share with the other centers, which the other centers could learn from and could use also as reference in developing their programs for seafarer, for fishers, if they do decide that this is one group of sea-based workers that need a lot of attention in the areas where they are.
Thank you. Any other comment? Yes.
Good afternoon, my dear colleagues. I am Father Victor Bombat from the Philippines, since I'm assigned in one of the provinces there as chaplain in our diocese of Aguilaran. Mama Roja was talking about, financial predicament as to the ministry that we have, which I really have felt it, because as per experience I had, there was an invitation of the mayor that we have, that there's a gathering of the seafarers, wives and families, that I was there and caught by surprise that this was being organized by the other religious sect. And I found out that even the leader of it was an active, in the apostolate, in the Catholic before, but because of financial assistance from the religious sect, he diverted to the other one. And it's good that the mayor was a good friend of mine. He's a very Catholic, that I was there. I feel insecure because we afforded to give meals and even transportation, whereas if we have to work in our own, we have to get it from our own pocket, even the transportation that we have. And there was given a proposal, the meeting in Manila, if we can professionalize also this ministry of the Stellarized. Any comment?
Thank you for that. Well, I think that the outcome of recommendations from the report indicate that the professionalization of the ministry could be a way forward for the sustainability of the ministry for another 100 years. I don't know if you have any additional comment on this before we close the panel. Maruha?
I remember, I think in the opening ceremony this morning, there was mention that the motu proprio is also celebrating a milestone that is in its 25th year. And perhaps, I hope we won't, this is not, I hope that it might be appropriate also to consider maybe reviewing the motu proprio and see how maybe it can be made a lot more relevant, maybe a lot more relevant considering the emerging realities that we are anticipating. So perhaps that's one of the things that can be considered as well over the short term.
Thank you. I see that Father Bruno is taking notes of this. So let's also explore the option of improving the motu proprio to help the mission for the next 100 years. Last comment question. Oh.
Jean-Henri David from Mauritius. We know that priests are rare to have.
Not in this room.
Sisters are also rare. Having lay people dedicated for seafarers are also centered. So my question is how to plan for the work for the seafarers, for the lay chaplain. Have a plan for the formation. You understand that? You must plan for so that the mission be attractive for the lay people.
Yeah, thank you. It has been attractive for me, definitely. So I am lay people serving for Stellarized. Here in the UK, we have significant numbers of lay colleagues, as well as ordained colleagues serving for the mission. I know this is quite not the same in different parts of the world. Of course, we can share our experiences, and I think that you have referred also to formation, and we will have also a dedicated session of this, I think it's for tomorrow, on the outcome of a trial that we have put forward just to explore how the Stellarized is perceived and seen in different parts of regions of the world. And there are mechanisms that we can put in place to our regional coordinators, and of course, under the guidance and direction of the dicastery that now has a clear mandate from the Pope to lead our mission as Stellarized. So I think this is the challenge, and this was the panel for the future. So This is part of our future challenges, and I hope that when we meet at our next World Congress, we will have tools that can be developed in the following years to favor the expansion and the consolidation of Stellarized for the future. I have converted myself in a panelist. It was supposed me only to moderate, but I have also contributed with my own views to different questions that have been raised based on my own experience. So with that, I think that we are perfectly on time. One more question.
Good afternoon. I'm Rosalind Rajasinghe. I'm the National Director of Stellarized in Australia. I'm the first woman National Director there. So I just want to share, we've talked a lot about lay people to be the National Directors and, chaplains probably. I've been there for 5 years now, but because of the pandemic, we were probably limited with what we could do, but although our centers have been still doing a lot. Now, our challenge, or one of our challenges, is that the national office, like the national director being non-priest, nobody supports really, like the dioceses wouldn't support us, because as you mentioned earlier, the priests and the deacons are supported by the diocese. If you're a layperson, nobody's to support you. So basically for the last 5 years, I'm only working part-time based on our remaining funds. So I'm just wondering, while we have a global network of Stellarized, there might be a possibility of us helping each other, raising up lay people to be in the ministry, and also volunteers to be in the ministry. We are trying to, it's Australia, it's supposed to be rich, but so now we are trying to, after the pandemic, can you imagine, we received 0 donations from our parishes during the pandemic, and so we have to use whatever reserves we have. Well, recently, we were trying to get some funding from the government. We're creating the proposals and all that. But we're working with the Anglicans, the Mission to Seafarers in Australia. So we're still, doing the proposals, but this is another option where we are hopeful something might come out from it. But yeah, these are some of the challenges of the lay people in the ministry.
Thank you. I would say that we are all, in our different capacities, we are all members of the same church. So the church has a mission, this is Stellarized mission, and we have to work together to get this mission to be as efficient as possible. And I'm sure that is going to be under careful consideration by the dicastery and the Vatican. When we have meetings, we perceive that, so we have to trust that the church and the mission of the church will survive for the future in whatever form, adapted to the new technologies, modern employment conditions, and always looking for the benefit of our beneficiaries. So I hope that this is the case, and that we can continue elaborating on this in future sessions, working all together. And again, the more we connect amongst ourselves through the different strategies that we put in place under the coordination of our regional representatives and the Vatican, the best we can implement our mission. So we look forward for that, and we will be closing this panel. Thank you very much.